On the 1st of July 1798, the French arrived from the coast of Alexandria, Egypt. The French had undergone a month-long voyage across the Mediterranean, during which they had captured the island of Malta and narrowly evaded a squadron of British warships hunting them. Despite everything they had already experienced, their campaign was only just beginning. Early the next morning, Napoleon led his soldiers to Alexandria, which was weakly defended by a garrison of only 500 Egyptian militia and 20 Mamluk warriors. Driven by thirst, the French soldiers rushed over the city's dilapidated fortifications and seized control of Alexandria by midday. The fleet then moved into the harbor to begin unloading the rest of the army. The French expedition of Egypt had begun. Egypt was under the nominal rule of the Ottoman Empire, though the true power rested in the hands of a warrior caste known as the Mamluks. The Mamluks had first come to Egypt in 1230 as fighting slaves purchased by the Ayyubid Sultan to strengthen his army. These slaves quickly formed themselves into a formidable fighting force. When the French first came to Egypt in 1248 during the Seventh Crusade, the Mamluks defeated them and even captured King Louis IX of France. By 1798, the Mamluks had become unpopular amongst their Egyptian subjects because of their oppressive tax policies, and Bonaparte decided to present himself as the liberator of the Egyptian people. By declaring war on the Mamluks, and the Mamluks alone, Bonaparte hoped to avoid the wrath of the Ottoman Empire and win the support of the Egyptian people. He ordered his soldiers to present themselves as friends of Islam and to treat any friendly villages and locals they came upon with respect. The Mamluks, meanwhile, were not intimidated by the presence of the French army, which was by this point one of the most efficient fighting forces in the world. Upon learning of the French capture of Alexandria, Murad Bey, one of the Mamluk leaders, promised that he would slice open their heads like watermelons in the fields. Napoleon began preparing for the capture of Cairo. However, this involved a 240-kilometer march through the desert. As Napoleon waited for the remaining horses, cannons, and supplies to be taken off the ships, he ordered General Louis Desaix's division to secure Damietta, a strategically important city on the road to Cairo about 65 kilometers from Alexandria. General Desaix was to be followed by 3 additional divisions, who were to set out from Alexandria as soon as they had finished disembarking. After each division had achieved its objective, the entire army was ordered to rendezvous at Romania for the final push toward Cairo. For Napoleon's men, this march through the desert would test the limits of their human endurance. The scorching desert heat rarely dipped below 35 degrees Celsius, a situation made even more excruciating by the soldiers' woolen uniforms, which were designed for colder climates. The heat led many soldiers to quickly drink all the water in their canteens, only to find that the expected wells along the route had been blocked up or poisoned, overheated, dehydrated, and in some cases blinded. Increasing numbers of French soldiers began to fall behind. These men were often picked off by the Mamluks and Bedouin tribesmen who had been trailing the invading army.
Infanterie, au rapport! Regroupez-vous!
Messengers were kidnapped, and stragglers were butchered. The road to Damietta was dotted with the mutilated corpses of French soldiers. Under consistent attack from both the elements and the Mamluks, it is no wonder that many soldiers became demoralized. Several Frenchmen committed suicide, while others plotted mutiny. By the 8th of July, all 4 of the divisions were in Damietta, with Napoleon and his staff joining them there the following day. Napoleon immediately held a war council where he was confronted by his disgruntled generals. Their ringleader was General Meyer, who angrily confronted Napoleon and accused him of having planned the Egyptian expedition just to satisfy his own vainglorious ambitions. Even Jean Lannes and Joachim Murat, 2 of Bonaparte's most trusted generals from the Italian campaign, vented their frustrations by throwing their hats in the sand and stomping on them. In response, Napoleon accused his officers of sedition and threatened to shoot General Thomas Alexander Dumas, another ringleader, if calm was not restored. Begrudgingly, the officers were persuaded to put aside their frustrations. General Meyer, realizing that his outburst had likely ended his career, went out into the desert and shot himself. Napoleon had reasserted his authority, but only barely. He knew that he had to give his soldiers a victory, lest he risk losing their support for good. Napoleon soon received intelligence that the Mamluks were gathering an army for the defense of Cairo. Murad Bey was leading 4,000 mounted Mamluks and 12,000 Fellahin militia down the Nile to meet the French, while Murad's co-ruler, Ibrahim Bey, was gathering another force at Cairo itself. On the 10th of July, one day after leaving Damietta, General de Saix encountered a detachment of Mamluk cavalry. They were chased off after a brief engagement, a sign that the enemy army was close. That same day, the men reached Romania, where, for the first time, the muddy waters of the Nile came into view. The soldiers rushed into the water and drank like cattle, and several died from overindulgence. With all 5 divisions now in one place, and with morale on the rise, Bonaparte felt that it was the perfect time to seek a proper battle. On the 12th of July, he ordered his 25,000-man army to advance along the west bank of the Nile. Encouraged by the close proximity of the Nile, the soldiers were in good spirits when they encountered Murad Bey's army on the 13th of July at the village of Shubra, Khit. Napoleon organized the infantry of each division into square formations. This was different the line formation in which Napoleonic infantry typically fought. A unit in square formation had no vulnerable flanks and could better withstand a cavalry charge. This tactic was particularly useful against the Mamluks. Though formidable horseback warriors, the Mamluks' tactics were dated, and they had limited experience countering modern European tactics. When the Mamluks charged just after sunrise, they were hit with a hail of French musket fire and grape shot from the cannons. Many fell to the ferocious fire from the French. Those riders who made it to the square circled the French formations in search of a weak spot, but to no avail. Meanwhile, the French navy was attacked by Mamluk gunboats, and fierce hand-to-hand fighting erupted in the Nile as Egyptian militia climbed aboard the French boats. Things got so desperate that the scholarly, and often elderly, savants had to take part in the fighting, while Captain Perry himself suffered a wound to the left arm. At the decisive moment, one of the French cannons hit the commanding Mamluk gunboat where the ammunition was stored. The resulting explosion was so big that men flew up into the air like birds. The sound of this explosion convinced Murad Bey to call off the fight, and the Mamluks retreated, leaving about 1,000 men killed or wounded on the battlefield. The French suffered around 300 casualties. After only a few hours of rest following the Battle of Shubra, Napoleon marched his army onward. They were still less than halfway to Cairo. As the army marched back into the unforgiving Egyptian desert, discipline started to break down once again. Whenever they spotted a village, the French would attack it. Their officers turned a blind eye as the men looted, burned, and killed. Bonaparte sensed that the decisive battle was growing near. On the 21st of July, the 5 French divisions arrived at Embabeh, where Murad was waiting for them. Murad commanded some 6,000 mounted Mamluks and perhaps as many as 54,000 Arab Fellahin conscript. The French had around 25,000 men in their army. Bonaparte once again organized each division into square formation. Once again, the Mamluks attacked the French. While the battle was in full force, Napoleon ordered Bonds and Vial's divisions to attack the enemy entrenchments at Embabeh. Before long, Bonds' men stormed the village, chasing the 2,000-man garrison into the night. The French fired volleys at the fleeing Arab militiamen. At least 1,000 of these men were drowned, and 600 were shot down by the French muskets. By 4:30 p.m., the battle was over. Nureddin took his 3,000 surviving Mamluks and fled toward his palace at Giza. It was a resounding victory for the French, who reported only 29 killed and 260 wounded, compared to nearly 10,000 Egyptian casualties.